I guess we're competing against NASA here. I'll try to be good and loud. Tell me if it's too loud, but I don't think so. As most of you, a little further away. Okay, I'll hold it here. A little over a year ago, we had a magnitude 7.1 earthquake in Alaska that was by any measure the most impactful earthquake of the last half century, and has generated a long list of questions and societal challenges for us. The earthquake caused somewhere on the order of $500 million worth of damage. Remarkably, there were no deaths, and their injuries were relatively minor. But I want to show a couple of figures that I think are relevant. On the left-hand side, you see southern Alaska, you see the location of the earthquake, and the shaded colors are the strength or the intensity of the shaking during that earthquake. If we look at a cross-section along this dotted line, if we slice the earth in half, we see a figure that looks something like this. One of the things that we notice first is that this earthquake did not technically occur in North America. Rather, it did not occur in the continent, but occurred on the subducting Pacific plate, sliding slowly beneath North America. The other things that we see on here are the distances from, the earthquake started here where the big circle is, and over the course of 10 or 15 seconds ruptured upward and about 20 kilometers or so to the north. So that's kind of the rough setting. Here's the messages that I want you to take home from this. If you were to look at a map right here, look where Anchorage is, you might call this a near miss. You might be tempted to say, well, this earthquake happened a little ways north of town, outside of town, if you will. But if you look in cross-section, I would argue that, in fact, the earthquake more or less occurred underneath, that is, deep underneath, Anchorage and the surrounding communities. The distance from the earthquake to Anchorage, Palmer, Chugiak is all about more or less the same distance from the earthquake. And this is why the shaking was spread over a very wide distance. There were several thousand square kilometers that experienced ground motions, experienced shaking that exceeded a quarter of the acceleration of gravity. That's a lot. That's why there was damage that was spread out over a 100-kilometer distance from Anchorage to Palmer. Damage was spread widely. But there's something missing from this as well. You don't see any red on this figure. There was nowhere in this for this earthquake that experienced the most severe shaking that we would expect from a magnitude 7 or even a much smaller earthquake. The magnitude 6.2 earthquake in Christchurch, New Zealand some years ago, which killed more than 150 people, magnitude 6.2, had much more violent ground motions than this earthquake. And the reason is very simply because the earthquake occurred deep. Every person on the surface of the earth was at least 30 kilometers away from the earthquake, which is why there's no bright red zone on here of the most extreme shaking. So this is a really simple idea, but it has a profound impact societally on the lessons that we take away from the earthquake, how we educate people about it, and where our research goes. Very simple questions. I guess we didn't really talk about the tsunami. Sorry, I apologize, Elena. There was no tsunami generated by this earthquake. A lot of very legitimate questions. Should we expect tsunamis from a magnitude 7 earthquake? Well, this earthquake did not generate one because the earthquake was too deep to create significant ground displacements at the surface. Does this mean that magnitude 7s don't generate tsunamis? No. Do we tell people, do we educate people that they have now lived through a magnitude 7 earthquake, or the full brunt of a magnitude 7 earthquake? And that seems a little sketchy. Buildings, homes, infrastructure that survived, can we say that they are good, they are robust to a magnitude 7 earthquake? Well, not really. Is this a worst case scenario? Absolutely not. You'd want to move this up closer to the surface. So these are the questions myself, colleagues are researching and will continue to pursue for years to come with these data. Are there questions? Sir? So the question is whether or not it was unusual for this earthquake to happen so far below the plate boundary. You mean not on this boundary zone, this interface between two plates? It's a good question. In Geology 101, we learn about how plates sliding past one another, as they do here, generate earthquakes where they come to, those plates come together. This earthquake occurred for a different reason. This occurred because that plate, remember this is all rock, when you stuff a giant piece of continent down underneath another one, you're subjecting it to extreme forces, and this plate actually fractured inside. It's the death throes of a plate being stuffed and pulled deep into the earth. So it's not actually unusual, but it is a different style than what we would call an interface earthquake. Other questions? Yes?
This wasn't the tsunami that came from the Anchorage quake in '64 to Crescent City, California. This wasn't that Anchorage.
No, this was a year ago. The question is how this relates to the 1964 tsunami, which Dr. Soleimani spoke about, which certainly set up a trans-Pacific tsunami, which did in fact have disastrous consequences in California, British Columbia, all over the Pacific coast.